and gentlemen, to another edition of Strange Bedfellas. Tonight, we have a special episode for you. Miss Amanda and the Wicked Conservative, my mom, are going to pitch you a mock political debate. Both potential candidates will be campaigning on 4 policy topics. They will be immigration, taxation, infrastructure, and the proper role of government. Each side will have a 5-minute introduction, followed by 4 rounds based on the policy topics. Each potential candidate will have 10 minutes to explain and defend their policy in each round. We will close with a campaign slogan from each candidate, and we'll ask you, the viewer, to like, subscribe, and vote in the comment section, just for fun. Ladies, if you're ready, I'll set the intro timer. Miss Amanda, your time starts now.
Good evening and welcome to all of you. My name is Amanda Cox, and I am pleased to be here tonight to propose possible avenues to resolution on some key issues facing every American today. I am happily married, mother of 2, Southern housewife, whose chief objective is to represent Georgians in their pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. So it is with great excitement that I am running for United States Congress in an effort to bring forth meaningful legislation aimed to do just that. Thank you to our host, and thank you for considering my candidacy.
Okay. And now, Ms. Conservative.
Hi out there, guys. I wanted to introduce myself as Georgia Liberty, and I wanted to talk to you guys today about how I would be running a campaign for a seat in the United States Congress. Today, I would like to say that my campaign will focus on the Constitution exclusively as it is written, not interpreted. With every act of legislation, state and local representative, along with the federal government, will have to reference which article and section of the Constitution guided their legislation, and we will be aiming to educate our voting constituents as well. As a mother of 2, I find it very, very important to educate and stimulate young minds into voting and understanding what a role of government is supposed to play in their lives. So I want to encourage all representatives to not only include a full description of their role and title when they run for a position in government, but I would also like to lead by example and do the same. So today, my policy and my standpoint will be a little bit of education and repeal and replace for pretty much all the legislation that's on the books. So where I plan to have a lot of work if I were to get into office, I also know that it is something that is extremely doable. It is fully constitutional and would end up simplifying the process going into the future. So I hope you guys like what you hear, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, ladies, for those wonderful introductions. Good luck to you both in the comment section. The first topic we are going to discuss is your position on role of government. Since my mom has home field advantage, we'll let Miss Amanda start this round. Your 10-minute timer starts now.
The role of government has been hotly debated between political parties historically, more so in recent decades. There is no shortage of opinion or rhetoric from either side of the aisle. There's only one small problem. The debate was settled with the creation of the Constitution. We need do nothing more than to take our instruction from the document that was painstakingly prescribed at the birth of this great nation. If elected, I would propose legislation to rightfully return the majority of power directly to the governed. In the simplest of terms, this would mean that the lowest level of government would hold the greatest amount or measure of authority, and the highest level of government would hold the least. It is best when adults are treated as such, don't you think? I propose that each county across the nation be the primary legislative, judicial, and executive body over its own citizens. These bodies should be composed of elected representatives only and hold all authority to initiate, implement, and enforce its own laws. Likewise, the state government should be fashioned in the same way, equally represented by county to address statewide matters. And finally, the federal government should follow suit, being represented by each state equally and governing only over national pursuits.
So for the role of government, I have two questions for you. My first question is, how fast would you rush bills through the Senate? Would that mean urgency equals speed, or would it be a natural flowing process?
A United States Senate was to review a bill that would be only, and under my plan, only for a federal law. And I am hoping that with the restructuring of the balance of powers between the branches and regaining the most authority to a local level, that the federal government could expedite many of their efforts and achieve their goals within a fiscal year of proposal.
Okay, and my second and last question for role of government, how connected would you personally be with the local government?
As a representative of the U.S. Congress, I would be in contact with the governor of Georgia as a representative to all Georgians in the federal branch. The ideas that I would take to U.S. Congress would come directly from the state representatives, which would come from the local representatives. So everything in my idea would be grassroots to federal. So if there was a proposal from a county or a state within Georgia, I would then propose that to the federal government, but again, only on federal matters.
Thank you for that wonderful topic of conversation. Are you ready, Miss Liberty?
So the first topic that we're going to discuss is the role of the federal government. My position on a role of the federal government is that the federal government should be confined to the explicit direction of the federal Constitution. As you all know, we have both a state and a federal constitution, both of which explicitly direct the roles of the branches of each set of governments. So we go into the fact that my campaign will focus on solutions that already exist by simply implementing the proper role of government as described in the founding documents. That also includes using the Federalist, the Anti-Federalist, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights. We need to educate the voter blocks on each level of government. Not only should people be aware of what the state government is in charge of and supposed to be powerful over, but we should be explicitly knowledgeable on what the federal government's explicit definition of function is. So we should not be handing over any state powers to a federal agency to hang over our state agency's head. And the biggest thing about being in Congress is just making sure that we know and that we are communicating to our constituents what our roles in government are. I also think that we need, as federal agencies, to be more informed and in tandem with our state legislators as well. I don't feel that there's a big communication happening between the state and the federal, which is why our constituents are getting confused with what the state role is and what the federal role is. So if we make a larger effort in the federal government to come down on the state level, then I believe we will be able to separate the powers more evenly. Once we do that, we can start buckling down on poor spending habits, which is held primarily in Congress. So that would be something that our branch would be directly responsible for and would be able to have an impact over. The role of government is explicitly defined in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. The bloated roles of the branches have existed for decades, and liberty on an individual level has suffered. So if we take the expanded powers of the federal government and combine them down to where they should be, naturally liberty will flourish, because there will not be an overreaching arm of government hanging over the state or the constituent of the state's heads. My second point is restoring the original intent of the United States versus operating as a federal power not only returns the power to the people and brings more individual liberty, but it also makes the people more responsible for the government that they are most responsible for. So whenever we write binding laws that reach across the nation, we are encompassing a bunch of people who might not have the same lifestyle as somebody that would live in the same state as you. So the federal government should limit those powers and limit the overreach that they have on the people, thus making liberty more accessible to everybody. And my final point for a limited role and proper role of government is that it is imperative for the transparency of a nation and of a government to educate their constituency in order to strengthen election engagement, fairness, and integrity. Not only will a more educated constituency show up more often to the voting booth, but they will make better decisions whenever they get there.
Liberty, I have a few questions to ask you about the role of government. How fast would you try to run bills through the Senate, and would that mean urgency equals speed?
I don't believe that it's my place as a potential United States House representative to dictate the speed of which legislation runs through the system. As you know, there is a vote threshold of 2/3 requirement to pass a piece of legislation from the House to the Senate, and also vice versa from the Senate to the president's desk. But I also believe that our job is to restrict the pieces of legislation as much as possible. When we go into running legislation through as urgent or making legislation in response to an incident, I believe that that starts us out on a bad premise, and it's not constitutionally sound. So in order for us to be successful in the House, I believe that we should be writing legislation with great hesitancy and actually attempting to repeal more than we are trying to replace.
Okay, my second question. How connected would you personally be with the local government?
As a House representative, many people would believe that you have no interaction between yourself and a local government. And I surely wouldn't want to step down on the state and infringe upon what they are trying to do on a local level. My position would be strictly representation of the state and would only step in if I were asked to do so.
Okay, 3 more to go. That's 1 round down, 3 more to go. Next up, the ladies will switch gears and tell us how they would tackle infrastructure. Last round, Miss Amanda started us off, so now I get to put my mom on the spot, even though she wrote the show. Okay, your time starts now.
Okay, so the next point on the debate slate is infrastructure. My position on infrastructure follows my entire campaign model and, of course, my idea of role of government. State and local government is better equipped to handle the infrastructure problems, and it should. So considering that the federal government is not allotted the power to oversee any construction or maintenance of roads, bridges, sewage systems, drainage areas, telephone lines, or power grid in any article or section of the Constitution, except for in the case of postal roads, it would dictate that the states would be responsible for these local infrastructure pieces that we are watching slowly deteriorate over time. Now, you would think that that would create a large burden for any particular area or municipality, but when you break it down, there's actually a really good reason why these things should fall into the lap of the state or the local legislator. Now, for the simple fact that the local constitutions usually cover these things and make the local municipalities responsible for these amenities anyways, it would actually allow the citizens to have a better job done and have the jobs that they need done more quickly and more efficiently. So it's the same theory as if the squeaky wheel would get the grease. You would be able to go directly to your city council or to your state legislator, make the complaint, and they would be able to directly look at their own budget and decide which projects needed to be done in regards to urgency and in regards to reach of development needs. So if more people needed a particularly problem pothole road filled and it was a higher density city, you would then spend the money to get that road more traveled, taken care of, rather than paving a dirt road in the country. Now, not only does that help the local people, but once the local people have voices in the local legislators and in the state systems, they would actually be able to start petitioning for their local businesses as well. And that would also make it a more quickly finished project. It would be a more appropriately priced project, and they would be able to have it done with less hassle, with less negotiations, because the people that they would be dealing with are local. And then of course, all the revenue would go directly back to the people who are in those communities. So you would never really see money leaving your area. Everything that you had coming in would then be used to sustain your area of living and would eventually drop the cost of living for everybody involved. So once you break into your own area of reliance, these things can end up positively affecting your taxes, and it'll force the municipalities to address the matters directly related to the infrastructure in the area. And again, putting it on an urgency level, with the most urgent having the most attention or the most quickly made product or production, and then putting it down to the things that are less urgent, in my humble opinion.
How much money would you allot to infrastructure?
I think that's a very good question. When you're talking about allotting money for infrastructure on a federal level, I believe that you do have to take the same approach that I pitched to you in my policy, whereas the state legislator would be the first stop for these types of asks or these types of requests for funding. When it comes to a federal level, it would have to be a very specific project under the scope of the federal government's jurisdiction in order for us to allot funding to the state. And it would be something that the federal government would then be in control of, meaning the state would not be required to upkeep a federal facility. The state would not be required to put their additional funding into a federal program that is affected of the states on a federal level. I believe that the infrastructure in particular would be best served keeping the money where it came from, going to the local municipalities and the local cities before coming to the federal government, as the federal government should not have money for those projects anyways.
Okay, my next, would the local and federal government collaborate on infrastructures or building?
For a local and federal government to collaborate on an infrastructural term, I don't believe that would be beneficial to the local government or under the scope of the federal government. I believe that we can aid and assist the states in many different ways, maybe reaching out to them with possible alternative funding means, or putting them in contact with contractors that are in partnership with the federal government or that are unique to the local agencies. But I don't believe that we should be collaborating on confusing the responsibility of a state and a federal facility. If it belongs to the state, it should stay with the state. If the feds are going to place something constructed inside the state for the state to use, then the state's money that's already going to the federal government should cover that facility, and both should remain separate and distinct entities.
Locally, would there be a minimum amount of money for the government to spend?
I believe that asking anybody to spend money on something that they don't need to spend money on is simply a waste of funds. So if you are actively and proactively handling your infrastructure on a community basis, and you're handling your funds to make these projects happen in a very successful synchronicity, I believe that that is something that would make it null and void. You wouldn't need to spend a minimum amount every year. You wouldn't have to put X amount of money off to the side, because in some years you will have more spending, and in other years you will have less spending. So to put a minimum requirement on it, absolutely not.
Okay, Ms. Amanda, your time starts now.
The role of government. It stands to reason that I would take the same approach to infrastructure. In order to give individuals the greatest amount of agency over their own lives, I would propose that infrastructure be built from the local up to the national. Both hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure efforts should be relegated first to counties, then to states, then to federal means. As technology and connectivity advances, many efforts to improve the American standard of living can be achieved through public-private partnerships. I believe that the American people are the most charitable on earth, and given the liberty to do so, would fund appropriate measures to ensure that their neighbors, statesmen, and country are wildly successful without fail. One aspect that I would immediately address is that of governmental overreach wherever it occurs. The infrastructure of a nation should be the manifestation of the dreams of the governed, not the government.
Infrastructure questions for you, Miss Amanda. My first question is, how much money would you try to get the Senate to allot to infrastructure?
It would be up to each branch locally first to use their money on their projects. And then the state would be relocated to the taxation it collects for state projects. So very rarely would a state project impact a county or a federal project impact a state. I would seek to reverse that order so that the money is not coming from the top down, but the bottom up. Any additional program or advancement would be done on a voluntary basis to the citizens. It would be presented as a campaign similar to a fundraiser. And if it just doesn't collect, it's not popular and we can it.
My second question about infrastructure is, would the local and federal government collaborate on infrastructure and buildings, such as limits, like spending limits for each government?
They would be limited by their amount of income. And so the county would be limited to the 10% that it collects from its citizens and businesses, the state likewise, and the federal likewise. So if the infrastructure is a federal building or let's say a national park, the federal government would have to reconcile that within their own budget, within their own means, not requiring additional funds mandatory from either the local municipalities or the state that the building or park resides in, but those voluntary funds could be collected in an effort.
Okay, and my last question about infrastructure is, would there ever be a minimum amount yearly that the government would have to spend on infrastructure?
No. There's would absolutely be no minimum. I think the incentive there is to not create problems where there is none and to fix the problems that are apparent. And so again, it would be on a county level, you're talking about your roads, your local courthouses, your schools, and this would be the lowest level of government. So the cities would be equally represented within the county by commissioners and councilmen, and they would all be elected answerable to the people. And so if the people wanted the road paved, then the county would be responsible for making sure that happens with their tax dollars.
Those were very interesting positions, ladies. I can't believe I agreed to this. Now Mom is going to expect better grades in history when it comes to government. Yes, she told me to say that. Next topic for consideration is another important one, especially for me in the future, taxation. Ms. Amanda, you have 10 minutes to tell me how you would handle taxation in our government. Your time starts now.
So what about taxes? I'm so glad you asked. If elected to Congress, I would propose legislation to repeal the current tax code in its entirety and replace it with this: a flat tax rate on individual and commercial income. Period. For argument's sake, let's fix the individual rate at 10% of gross annual income and the commercial rate at 20% gross annual income. Business owners would be exempt from the individual rate. This bill would eliminate all other taxes. Government budgets would finally be restricted to the confines of its income. Any additional funds desired by governmental agencies would only be funded voluntarily by that of the governed through campaign. So what would this look like? Again, my reasoning promotes the empowerment of the people to regain maximum agency over their daily lives. Taxes would be collected by the county of private residence for individuals and by county business license for commercial entities. Then 10% of the county gross taxation would be forwarded to the state. Finally, 10% of the state's gross taxation would be forwarded to the federal government. By enriching the people at the county level first, we promote the sentiment that the wage earner should have the most control over how that wage is dispersed. Here's the takeaway: all incomes would be taxed and nothing else.
One question about taxation. If there was one tax law that you could change, how would you change it and why?
I would change the federal income tax law. If I could only change one, I would eliminate federal taxes altogether, and the federal government would not have authority to collect monies from the state. The state would have to pool their money voluntarily, protection of the nation.
Now, from Miss Liberty's point of view.
So the next topic on the debate schedule is taxation. My position on taxation is going to take, of course, you guessed it, a constitutional standpoint, specifically coming from our founding father, Alexander Hamilton. Federal taxes are also explicitly defined as being applicable to the general welfare of the nation and to be laden upon the people, mostly as indirect taxes on duties, imposts, and excises, and only directly as income, property, or purchase tax in times of war. So tax breakdowns by branch and budget and put back into constitutional context would allow for less waste, a lower tax burden for all constituents, and produce less debt on a federal level. The original explanation of federal taxes by Hamilton was that by limiting the taxation abilities of the federal government, the people were able to keep them operating within their means. We can see how this check and balance has gotten away from the people with the bloated federal spending that we have now. Taxation by representation of the states puts the burden of debt equally across the nation as each state balances their income with their output. For example, less populated states would equal less taxes, and more populated states would equal more taxation, just for the simple burden of output to input that the states were going to need from the federal government. Eliminating direct taxes directly impacts the federal spending. That's normally where the federal government gets their money for their welfare programs and the extended federal programs that they have running now in the government. If we work to re-centralize power and responsibility to the states, the federal spending programs can decrease, and once they become state or local programs, more charity-run organizations can begin and more money can be better spent on the issues that really need to be taken care of closer to the constituent base. As you can see with me and Amanda's points together, we are coming down to a smaller government and a more centralized government. And we really believe that that is going to create a better success rate for our communities and eventually for the entire nation.
If you could change any tax law, what would it be and why?
That's an excellent question, as I'm not extremely familiar with particular tax laws. I think that I would have to agree with my policy premise and state that any direct taxes upon the people are an infringement of the taxation clause in the Constitution. So where we typically do the property tax and you have a license tax and you have to pay taxes on different services, there's a very specific set of things that can and can't be taxed. So I think that I would eliminate all direct taxes as a start to the revamping of the taxation process.
Well, we've gone over a lot of policy propositions so far, but we've saved the most complicated for last, just like my sister. The last topic for discussion tonight is immigration. After they finish, we'll wrap up with a fine campaign slogan from the ladies and sign off for the evening. My mom will start this round, regretfully.
So we've gotten down to the last topic of the night, and it is probably one of the most important topics on the list, and that is immigration. So the reason we went in this order, role of government, infrastructure, taxation, and lastly, immigration, is because I strongly believe that that is the way that we should be carrying out our actions and duties in government. We should be first and foremost preoccupied with the role of government and asking each and every representative if they are acting within the scope of their position and if they are acting within the scope of the Constitution. Once we establish our representation, then we can establish where we live in our infrastructure and how we are going to take care of the area that we are going to live. Once we establish how we are going to take care of what we live, where we live, we have to establish how we're going to pay for how we're going to take care of where we live. And then once we establish how we're going to pay for how we're going to take care of where we live, we might want to add some more people, and that's where immigration comes in. My position on immigration is that the reform truly starts by repealing all current laws, resolving all current backlogs in the court, and replacing the current standard with a strict uniform approach. Now, our immigration law as it stands is long, redundant, complex, and restricts the states from enforcing their borders while encouraging migrants to forego using the proper system and to instead enter illegally. Now, I believe that it is imperative to start a new immigration policy that we shut down all immigration off top. If I were to be elected to this position, I would strongly encourage everyone to shut down our borders and get the backlog cleared before we begin again. Not only will this give us time to clear out the backlog on the old laws and give people who have been waiting in line patiently for their yes or no citizenship status, it would give we, the members of Congress, time to scrap, repair, replace, repeal, whatever you want to call it, get rid of the entire immigration law as it sits, and bring in a new program that I would like to pitch to you called the American Citizenship Consideration Program. This program would be a very strict uniform process for all immigrants seeking citizenship. It would start with basic general physicals for both adults and children. Any child that was brought to the border without adult supervision would automatically be sent back to their country of origin. It is sad that we have many predators that are roaming around, taking children and preying on them, using them to cross our borders. And I just feel that it would send a very strong and clear message that we do not wish to have any child be taken advantage of if we would simply send these children back to their countries of origin. That would really require that we have a solid communication line with these bordering countries, our problem countries, but I think that it eventually would work out best, not only for ourselves, but also for the children. Now, if a minor is brought into custody with immigration with their parents, then we would return them to their parents and continue with what I consider the proper way to apply for citizenship in America. So after you get your basic physical, as long as you pass your basic physical, then you would be put into the American Citizenship Consideration Program. This program is a 5-year program for citizenship. It would also include splitting the costs for the programs between the federal and the state government as was appropriated by the Constitution, and who would be responsible for the cost of each prospective location, as far as, you know, the states being in charge of border patrol, maintaining the physical borders. They would have the final say-so over deportation, and they would also be the governing factor when it comes to prosecuting criminals that cross the border. I believe that this would also be a good program or a good time to revamp the civics test for all citizens. So we in Congress would work on a brand new civics test that would focus less on American history and more on Americans' role in government, how to get an ID, how to look up proper role of government, what their proper role is in the voting blocks. And also, I would like to create programs that would help them get established in America, find ways for them to find employment, find ways for them to find, you know, how to get their kids enrolled in school and find housing. These programs, I believe, should be funded on the federal side of the government, since they are ultimately in charge of citizenship. So once all of these tests, the physical tests, the civics tests, and the 5 years residency and limitations with felonious crimes, once all these hoops or check marks were met, all these requirements were met, you would have the option for citizenship after a 5-year tenureship. I think this would cut down on lengthy court battles and provide a uniform experience across the board. Last but not least, I do believe that we should cut asylum in this country. There are citizen rights movements across the globe. There's no one country where civil rights abuses are being committed in such an atrocious state that there's not somewhere for these people to go. There's no reason why they should be here in America looking for asylum, and ultimately, if they want to be in America, they should be able to come in on a merit-based system and want to provide the best life in America for their family, being Americans. And I believe that this basic outline of a program would truly help them do that.
If the applicant commits a minor crime in their home country, does that disqualify them from being an applicant for the U.S.?
No. As far as immigration is concerned, I don't feel that it is our job necessarily to dictate what is legal and what is illegal in a different country. And sometimes there are corrupt governments that operate abroad. So not that I do not trust our allies or other nations, but I do believe that coming to America should begin with a fresh start. So as long as they are not on a extreme terrorist watch group, or that they don't come over as Osama bin Laden, I don't feel that there would be anything that would bar somebody from beginning the process for citizenship under my immigration policy.
Would there be any possible way for applicants to reapply if failing a minor section of your test?
In my immigration policy, a big part is going to rely on revamping the civics test. As the civics test for immigration stands now, it is very historically bound and has a lot of superficial questions and things that don't necessarily equate to being an American citizen. So first and foremost, if you would not pass the civics test revamped, that would bar you the opportunity to make the citizenship in the 5 years of my program. Ideally, in my program, we want to get people who want to be American citizens, citizenship as much as possible, or as quickly as possible, with as little cost to the American people and as much gain to the American people. Because when we bring these people in, we are hoping to assess and make them assets to our country. So in order for them to be successful, I don't think that we should hang up on little things of them failing. I believe that we should give them as much opportunity as possible to succeed. Now, if they do commit a felonious act or a violent act, that would bar them immediately and result in deportation.
Would the U.S. collaborate with the home country for any punishment for failing the U.S. entry test on regards of felonious crimes or violent crimes?
Felonious crimes committed in the United States?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Absolutely not. We would not collaborate with any foreign entity outside the jurisdiction of the United States of America and the Geneva Convention. We do not possess the power to prosecute abroad. So therefore, if the immigrant was not yet a citizen I believe that the most effective way to deal with that problem is to deport them back to the country of origin and bar them returning access.
What is your slogan and what does it represent?
So I really wanted to drive home my constitutional perspective. So I decided to go with the slogan, "We are the composition of the Constitution." It means exactly what it says. The American people are the backbone to the Constitution. We are a nation of self-governance, and united we stand, divided we fall. So that's my slogan in a nutshell.
Run for president or consider running for president?
I would not consider running for president, and my answer for not running for president is pretty simple. The president's role is very limited and defined as per the Constitution. Therefore, he is basically the overseer of the Congress. And if I would like to have the impact on policy and people the way that I would want to, the seat in the House is the best position for me.
If you could unseat any representative, who would it be and why?
That is a $1 million question, and unfortunately, I would have to say that our young congressional congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, would have to get the boot from me. I do not believe that she represents the position very well. I think that she needs a lot of education concerning her role in government and the separation of power in government. And I feel that her actions are very detrimental to my personal policy and my personal pursuit of this congressional seat. So therefore, I would have to unseat AOC.
Now, Miss Amanda, your 10-minute timer for immigration starts now.
Immigration is one of those topics that no one seems to be able to make a cogent argument for or against. I put forward this proposal for your consideration. Secure our borders and ports of entry. All incoming immigrants back to their countries of origin without entry or detention. Second, develop a focused division of the Department of State to utilize current U.S. embassies and consulates to receive applicants desiring citizenship. Applicants would be screened through the Department of Homeland Security to determine eligibility before being subsequently enrolled in an Introduction to American Citizenship course provided by the Department of State on embassy campuses. The course would prepare applicants to take the U.S. citizenship test. Once the course is completed and an applicant passes the test, applicants would then be enrolled in an American career database from which American employers seek employees. One stipulation would be mandated. American employers must receive at least 100 domestic applications and hold at least 5 interviews before becoming eligible to draw from the international pool. Applicants enrolled in the database would receive resume building assistance from the Department of State as part of our effort to match the applicant with potential employers. Upon hire, applicant, eligible spouse, and eligible dependent children would be granted probationary citizenship for 1 year and financially assisted with their initial relocation. Immigrants must contract with the United States government to 1, maintain employment during probationary period, and 2, avoid any criminal convictions. Failure to fulfill these contracted obligations would result in the nullification of permanent citizenship eligibility, deportation, and a permanent ban on re-entry to the U.S. After successful probation, immigrants would be granted full citizenship with all the rights and responsibilities that come with such an honor.
Miss Amanda, first question from the moderator on immigration. If the applicant commits a minor crime in their home country, does that disqualify them from U.S. entry?
Only criminal crimes occurring within the country of origin or internationally would be considered through the screening process by Homeland Security. If they appear on a no-fly list, if they are associated with watch groups, that would disqualify them, regardless of conviction. But a minor traffic or civil infraction would not automatically disqualify them without, maybe if that was repetitive. So if you have a lot, then Homeland Security would then look at you on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, my second question for immigration. Would there be any possible way for applicants to reapply if they fail a minor part of the U.S. entry test?
No, at any point, if they are to fail in their contracted obligations, that meaning first starting with the coursework, then completing and passing the citizenship test, and then their probationary period, keeping employment and avoiding criminal conviction. If they fail on any one of those points, they will be permanently banned from re-entry and deported immediately.
And my last question for immigration. Would the home country collaborate with the U.S. to do some kind of punishment for federal crimes that the applicant commits in the U.S.? So basically, would there be any punishment whenever they get back to their home country from doing any federal crime in the U.S.?
If a crime is committed by a non-resident, we don't have a lot of control as it stands, but these immigrants would be coming in under a probationary citizenship status. They would be given a provisionary identification, an ID card, and then subsequently a driver's license should they pass that test. Other than not being a full-fledged citizen, they would be treated under our judicial systems as a citizen. So if they committed a crime while here, we would have sole right to prosecute them to the fullest extent of our laws. And if they were to leave the country to avoid prosecution, yes, we would have arrangements with the countries that we're dealing with through the embassy to have them extradited back for prosecution. If a country did not want to play by those rules, we simply would not include them in this immigration program.
Now tell us about your slogan and what it means.
Well, I want to first thank you again to our audience. Thank you to our host. I want to leave you with one last consideration. We're adults. Let us reason together. And what I mean by that is that if we come together from our different walks of life and we simply reason for the greater good under the Constitution as it's written, then we have no bounds.
So would you ever run for president?
No, I would not. I feel compelled to run for Congress because I feel that's where I can execute the most change for the country, the change that I see needs be done. But as a president, I traditionally believe that that is a role for a visionary, and a visionary I am not.
If you could unseat any representative, who would it be and why?
question. We have quite a few characters currently in office, but by the time that I'm elected, we may have some that are on the fringes. And so maybe not unseat anyone, but campaign against Stacey Abrams.
Very nice having you too, Miss Amanda. So make sure you like and subscribe to the Wiccan Conservative and tune in every single Saturday for an edition of Strange Bedfellas, where you can catch on good content like this. And let me know in the comment section who you would vote for and why. And that